And welcome to the Refugee Welcome Collective Lunch and Learn series. In these sessions, we aim to bring interesting and timely information to you, supporters of refugees. Whether you are a volunteer, a community sponsor, resettlement agency staff, a local advocate, or just someone who is interested in learning more, we hope you enjoy today's session, Home Found, Advice for an Effective Housing Search. Like I said, these lunch and learns are hosted by Refugee Welcome Collective. Refugee Welcome Collective collaborates with partners to provide in-depth training programs, weekly learning sessions, resources, and on-demand technical assistance for sponsors, practitioners at resettlement agencies, refugees paired with sponsors, community and institutional partners, and others to support quality community sponsorship programs across the United States. Let's see. Next, Grace. As a reminder for everyone on today's call, there is a control panel in your upper right-hand corner that will allow you to submit questions through the questions box. There will be ample time at the end of the webinar for Q&A. Everyone on today's webinar is automatically muted. However, if you have any tech issues, please raise your hand through the control panel or submit a question in the questions box so that we can assist you. Additionally, the presentation, any resources, and a recording will be sent to everyone following today's webinar. This brings us to our presenter for today. Back with us is Lynette Pearl. Lynette is the Senior Housing Associate at, and she has over 17 years of experience in affordable housing and property management. So we're very lucky to have her. I'll let her add anything else about her plentiful experience and share with us today. Thanks, Lynette.
Thank you for having me again. So we're going to go ahead and get started. This webinar is for anyone who wants to know what steps to take in order to conduct an effective housing search. But before I go into the training, I want to give a brief overview of what Refugee Housing Solutions do. Next, Grace. Who we are. Refugee Housing Solutions was created to bring housing experts, property owners, key stakeholders, and those in the refugee resettlement space together in order to discuss best practices and innovative solutions that would increase housing opportunities for newcomers. We are a project of CWS Church World Service funded by the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, PRM. With this funding, we are able to provide resources, training, and one-on-one technical support to the 9 resettlement agencies and the 800 affiliates throughout the United States. We also provide service and support to landlords, property managers, housing providers, sponsors, and volunteers. Since collaboration and partnerships are vital to addressing this housing crisis, we also have initiated a national housing working group and a regional community practice. The National Housing Working Group and Regional Community Practice provide stakeholders a space to share best practices in order to create innovative housing opportunities for newcomers. So at the end, you will see our website, and you can see how you can get involved in either or. We would like your input in these community practice and the working group. Next slide. Our goals are to develop relationship with landlords interested in renting to refugees, to provide technical assistance on housing solution, and to collaborate, create innovative housing solutions. And we want to increase capacity for landlords to rent to refugees. So that's one of our main goals. Next slide. So let's go ahead and get into the presentation. Before the housing search begins, information is needed, such as what a client can afford, their budget, what state and city they will be resettled in, location, and the size unit needed for them to be comfortably housed, their needs. By having this information, you can identify what types of properties would be appropriate to include in your search. Now, if you are a volunteer or a sponsor working with a resettlement agency, you may want to clarify if doing housing searches are part of your responsibilities, and if so, if there's some specific information or amenities you should include in that search outside the location and size. Next slide. Okay, determining budget and affordability. This is very important in doing a housing search. A client's budget has an impact on the search. It affects the location, the types of amenities, bedroom size, property type, and grade. Before you can do the search, you need to know their budget and what rent amount is considered affordable. So how do you determine the rent amount and affordability? So we're going to go into that. To determine what a client can afford, you need to calculate all their monthly expenses first to create the budget. The budget should include the client's monthly financial obligations before rental expenses. I used to use, if you use the 50-30-20 rule, you can determine affordability. So let's start with the 50-30-20 allocation. This allocation states that 50% of one's income after taxes should go towards needs, 30% towards wants, and the remaining 20% for savings and additional debt payments. I like examples, so we're going to go into this example. So let's look at Miss I Need a Home. Miss I Need a Home earns $2,500 per month after taxes and has the following expenses. She has $100 for daycare, $200 for her car note, and $50 for car insurance, and $150 for groceries. Miss I Need a Home total monthly expenses are $500. Based on the 50-30-20 allocation, Miss I Need a Home has $750 available for rent. Another affordability equation you can use is the 30% rule of thumb. This is when a person should not spend more than 30% of their income on rent. I don't like using the 30% rent rule of thumb, and the reason why, you still get the same results. But when I get to talk about their budget, I can see some expenses that maybe we can lower or make some suggestions or give them some resources. So when you do that 50-30-20% allocation conversation, it opens up more options for you to see what's going on with your client's budget. So that's why I prefer that versus just doing 30% off the top. Next slide, please. So once the budget is determined, which we did, we know what the budget is, you and the client should list what amenities are needed to house them comfortably. During this discussion, if you find the client is requesting a want instead of a need, you should inform them that wants come with an expense, and the goal is for them to be housed in a safe, sanitary, affordable unit. Needs vary from person to person, but below are some standard needs you should gather for the search. These are standard needs. The size of the unit. When considering the size of a unit, the number of bedrooms to search for, make sure you know the family size complies with the local occupancy limitations, because that can be an issue. We used to go old school. The best practice was 2 heartbeats to a room, but that has changed now that we have larger families. So you can go past that 2 heartbeats to a room depending on the age of the person, the sex, but also make sure it's in compliance with local occupancy limits. So it's not 2 heartbeats to a room anymore. You can change that slightly. This is one of the area a client might express more of a want than a need. They may want a 4-bedroom, but only need a 3-bedroom. I've seen sometimes clients want something bigger, but again, affordability is affordability. If they can afford it, then I say go for it. Accessibility requirements, price and location are big factors in directing a search, but accessibility should be one as well. If your client has a disability and needs special accommodations in their living quarters to make them comfortable, this should be taken into consideration when you're doing the housing search. There are special filters you can use to find apartments and units that can meet accessibility requirements, and we'll go into that later. Amenities, an apartment included amenities should be low on the priority list, but local amenities should be taken into consideration during the search, such as grocery stores, laundromats, cafes, and parks. A client having access to such amenities increase their feeling of safety, social trust, and feel that they're part of the community. So when I talk about amenities, if you see there's going to be amenity in the unit that's going to affect the cost of the unit, but that amenity, if they get something smaller and there's like a laundromat locally, then I would go with the smaller unit versus having something in the apartment, because that makes the rent go up. Access to public transportation. Public transportation is a lifeline that provides a way for a refugee and newcomer to have access to essential services. If the client doesn't have transportation, it's important to find rentals that have access to public transportation with a good walk score. You can usually see a walk score of apartment. A walk score determines how easily one can get around in a neighborhood. It also tells the access and ability to run errands without a use of a car. So also look at that walk score as well. Housing newcomers and refugees close to friends and or family or support system and in a welcome community is part of the resettlement process. So locating rental close to friends, family members, or in a newcomer-friendly community is necessary and should be considered in the search. Type of neighborhood. Is the neighborhood refugee newcomer friendly? Since refugee newcomers are rebuilding their lives, it's very important for them to find a place they feel welcome. So that is something you need to take into consideration when you're doing the housing search. Okay, next slide, thank you. Okay, by knowing the different types of affordable housing funding, sources, and subsidies, you can be more efficient with your search by identifying the appropriate resources to include or exclude out of your search. For example, if you have a client that has zero income, then public housing programs, project-based properties would be suitable for the search. So we're going to go into the different types of housing subsidies and properties, because once you can identify what your client qualifies for, that would be put in your search plan. So let's talk about market rate properties. These are properties that are non-subsidized properties for which a client will pay the full rent. So if the rent is $800, they would pay the full rent. So there's no subsidy to a market rate property. Public housing programs are funded through HUD, but are administered by a local housing authority and are available for low-income families and individuals whose household income is less than 80% of the AMI, area's median income. The public housing program also includes Housing Choice Voucher Program, formerly known as Section 8. If they meet income guidelines, non-citizens, I'm going to repeat that, non-citizens with certain statuses are eligible for federal rental assistance programs, including refugees and asylees. Now, when we talk about public housing and the Housing Choice Voucher Program, just a caveat, these programs have long waiting lists, especially in bigger cities. So don't get discouraged if you want to try to get your client on the waiting list, but find out what the waiting list is, find out how long the waiting list is. And sometimes when you go in smaller cities or more rural areas, they don't have quite big of a waiting list like a place like Chicago, which is a 5-year waiting list. So just FYI. Project-based Section 8 rental properties, they are government-funded programs that provide rental housing assistance to low-income households in privately owned managed rental units. With this, the program subsidy is tied to the unit, not the individual, okay? Unlike the Housing Choice Voucher, with the Housing Choice Voucher, the subsidy stays with the individual as long as they financially qualify. So if you locate this type of property for a client, it's essential to explain to them that the subsidy is tied to the unit. And if they move, they will no longer have the rental assistance, because a lot of clients get confused thinking, oh, I have a Housing Choice Voucher, which you don't. The subsidy is tied to the unit. So the minute they leave, they're going to leave that subsidy behind because it's with the unit. Section 811 supportive housing properties, it provides subsidized rental assistance and supportive services for individuals with disabilities to live independently in the community. This program is for households with income that's 30% below AMI, with at least one adult member in the family with a disability. So that's how they can qualify for that particular property. And then we have our low income housing tax credit. Property is apartment complex or housing project owned by a developer or landlord who participates in the federal low income housing tax credit program. Now with this, the developers and landlords receive tax credits by providing affordable housing to low income tenants as a restricted rent amount. So the tenant does not get the subsidy. The property management company and the developer gets it, because they said, well, if you provide low income units, we're going to give you a tax break. So just FYI. Next slide. So once you have the client search profile, so we did the search profile, we know how much rent they can afford. We know you're going to figure out what unit size they need, the amenities, and then you know what type of property type they will qualify. Then you can narrow down your search engines and what resources to use to find housing. This is not set in stone. This is what I used to do when I had to find housing for clients. I would break it down in 5 different areas. I said, for this training, I had 5 resource areas to research to generate my housing leads for my search plan. That's what I used to do. I would go and say, okay, does my client qualify for affordable housing? If they did, then I know I would have to do affordable housing search. Then I would go, okay, do community development corporations. We'll talk about that. I would put that in my search. Then I would go to the popular housing search engines and I would separate it with anything I had in that search. Then I would look at most of the biggest property management companies and I would look them up and see, okay, do they have any vacancies open? And then I would do non-traditional housing options and we'll go with that, okay? So let's talk about the affordable housing resource search. So if my client was qualified for that, the first area is affordable housing. If a client qualifies and is interested, because you got to make sure they're interested first. They might qualify, that doesn't mean they're interested in applying for public housing or housing choice voucher program. You would need to contact the local housing authority regarding their application process and availability. We talked about the waiting list. As you can see, I have the HUD PHA contact information website page. You can link onto that and you can find out what housing authorities are available in your area. As I mentioned earlier, low income tax credit properties is apartment complex or a housing project owned by a developer or a landlord who participates in this program. Developers and landlords can claim tax credits for eligible buildings in return for renting some of all their apartments to low income tenants at a restricted rent. So the rent is restricted. There's a cap on how much they can charge. HUD has a link to the tax credit database. It's kind of difficult to read, but you can pull it up and you can find out what tax credit properties are in your area. So the link is included into that. So you guys will get all this information. So you can locate what tax credit property is in your area through that link. Affordablehousing.com is the largest and the most trusted source for finding income-based and tax credit properties as well. This site also provides a central location to find updates on what housing authority waitlists are open. So sometimes they have announcements on this link where you can see what what housing authorities waitlists have been open and accepting applications. Socialservice.com is a search engine that streamlines the process of finding housing for people who are homeless or at risk of homelessness by providing a single point of contact for housing providers, service agencies, and tenants. So this is a good housing search too if you know your family needs affordable housing. And then affordable housing finance is a way to find affordable housing, is knowing what the top affordable housing developers are. And the Affordable Housing Finance website provides a yearly report of the top performing 50 developers with direct links to each company's affordable housing property. So I have a link. I don't know if you can hit that link. Can you hit that link?
Yeah, Grace? And actually, Grace, if you could advance the slide. Let's see, and I think these are the links that you just
those are links I would talk about. The last one, affordable housing. Can you hit that below one for me, Grace? Double click it. Please let it open.
We can send these links out.
Okay.
To all the,
so I wanted you guys to see that each year I would pull this report up and I would have my case managers to see who are the top performing affordable housing developers. And this list will show you each year, and then that would be a source. Okay. What happened? Oh, there we go. Good job, Grace. As you can see, can you scroll down a little bit? This is the most updated list. Thank you. So those are the top performing affordable housing apartment complexes. And I would pull this report every year to see who was performing. And then if you hit each individual link, it will take you to their actual page. And then you can see what is available in, what is in their profile and what properties are available in what states.
I see. So even on this website, like for example, even though it says like Dominion is in Plymouth, Minnesota, even if you are in another state, you might check and see if Dominion has like a property in your city.
That's just what their headquarters is. Yeah, that's for their headquarters. If you hit that link, you can see all the apartments and all the things, the portfolio in their actual state. So I would pull this report every year to see who were performing. So that's a source of resource for you. And then can we go to the Community Development Corporation search resource? The next slide for me, Grace. The next slide, Grace. There we go. Community Development Corporation, a lot of people don't know what they are. They are nonprofit community-focused entities whose mission is to support their affiliate city neighborhoods with a range of programs such as affordable housing, economic development, safety, and social services. CDCs, their focus is the development of affordable housing. That's their goal. And below are some of the largest nonprofits that provide affordable housing. Catholic Charities is one of them. They're one of the biggest ones. Lutheran Social Service, Salvation Army, Volunteers of America, Mercy House, Preservation of Affordable Housing, National Church Residencies, and you can also check your local CDC. Now, they're not in every area, but that's just something you can put on your search list to see if these entities have affordable housing. Next slide. And here are the more popular common housing searches engines I would go to. I would have that. And then once I do that, I will go to my property management company searches. Next slide. And property management companies are an excellent resource for finding affordable housing. I pull a report, I list the top 15 property management companies that provide affordable housing. So I always do that, pull that list every year. Now, property management companies are slightly different because they've been hired to manage properties for either landlords or other properties, but I pull those up to see who they are. And here's a list. And you can include that in your search engine. And then if you hit the next, I have the links to those as well. I don't know if you want to go ahead and hit one so they can see what it looks like. And they'll show everything, what portfolios, what apartments in each state. I think she's going to do it.
And some folks are asking about with all the links, but we will be sending out the presentation with all of these links in them too.
And as you can see, with this particular Gray Star, you can put in an area and you can see where all their apartments are located throughout the United States. All right. So let's go into our non-traditional search resources. The next slide. Okay, the first one is not going to be a popular one. Attending eviction court. We did this pre-COVID. I think eviction courts are opening back up where people physically have to attend the eviction court. I know it's a sad situation. However, this is an opportunity that a lot of property managers don't like to go to eviction court unless they have a lot of evictions lined up because, of course, it's filing, it saves time. So usually we would attend eviction court and hand out business cards. And you can also see a list of who's being evicted and also what property management company is behind that eviction. And if I see one particular property management company, I would wait to see who the actual property manager was or who the representative was. And I said, oh, this is such a sad situation. I do know you have vacancies. The good thing is I'll give them a business card and say, well, we have clients right now that need housing and they're getting support. And then I would just go into my spiel. And then I also would have a property landlord packet to give them information about my program, why we were successful, our success rate, and have a testimony in that packet. I would hand it to them and say, here's a packet. So if you're looking for tenants are getting support and they're ready to rent right now, please give us a call. I know that's not a popular thing, but that was one way that we would find housing resources for our clients. And it gave that property management reassurance because it said this person went out their way to come to this court and to sell me on what they're doing and they're prepared to have a landlord and property management packet. And then they'd go through the packet and we would set up a meeting to say, okay, how we can build a partnership. A realtor is a good source. I would use, my cousin was a realtor. They can be an asset in finding rental properties. They have access to MLS listings and have direct relationships with landlords and owners and property managers. Their services are usually free when assisting with rental properties because they get paid by either the owner. They can also assist the client with rental negotiations and the lease signing. The one thing about I like working with realtors, even if they're working with an owner that has their house up for sale, and if the house is up for sale and it gets past three months, they'll talk to that owner and say, okay, as long as that house is sitting, you're losing money. Have you thought about renting your house out? So if you have a relationship with a realtor, a real close relationship, you can ask them, do you have any owners that are trying to sell their house and they're not being successful? Will they consider renting it to one of our families? And there are two major real estate companies that have also a rental search option on their website, and that's Keller Williams and Remax. So they do have an actual site where they have rentals you can search for. Another thing we did in Texas, which was real big, and again, this is not everywhere, We used apartment locators. Services are available in bigger cities and have similar benefits to using a real estate agent. The owner and property management company pay their fees, and many offer cash rebates to clients, an enticement to sign a lease. And we have Facebook Marketplace. That's a good place, a service provided through Facebook where private landlords post their rental properties. Renters can search for properties by location, price, range, and contact the landlord directly through Messenger. But before contacting any private landlord, I always like, especially if you're going to do Craigslist as well, I recommend verifying the property address and the owner through a title and deed search. You can do this by looking up the property through your local assessor's or county clerk's office, just to make sure you're not, teaming up with somebody shaky. They're actually owning that property, especially with private landlords. I suggest you do that. WalkScore, I talked about that earlier. WalkScore is a search engine that appeals to renters concerned with transportation costs, commute times, access to public transportation, or a property location to activities. So they actually have a search engine as well, Rental Beast, this search engine is where landlords, agents, and real estate brokers post their available properties with real-time accuracy. The majority of the properties in this search engine are market rate, however, they're market rates. And don't let the name fool you. Sublet.com is not just about sublets. They offer short-term, long-term, furnished and unfurnished rentals are listed on their website. When you need to find affordable housing for larger families, when I looked at Texas, we got a lot of larger families. I did searches for manufactured mobile homes. That's another option. And I have the 2 top biggest mobile home manufacturers on this site. And then you can go to mobilehome.net and they can pull up manufactured and mobile homes that are for rent. Okay, so next slide. In order to make sure you explore all your housing options, you should have a search plan, and the search plan tracks what resources should be researched and searched to locate housing. Like we talked about, I use the 5 areas of resources as the categories for the search plan outline. I use this checklist to keep track of my activities when I used to do my search, and then you can indicate whether you have completed a particular activity by placing an X in the left-hand. Oh, I didn't include that, I'm sorry. I usually have a checklist. I didn't put it in the slide, and I apologize. I'll make sure I get that. I have a housing check plan you can look at, or you can tweak it to whether you like it to make it more usable for you. But there's a checklist I would use. So I would have my subtopics, and then I would have all the areas I would search in that subtopic and check it off. And then my search plan, the next slide. And I'm gonna give you an example of the search plan. The next slide. So this is what I was going to give you guys. This is how my search plan would look like. I would have it in the subcategories, and then I would check off each area I did my search to make sure I stayed organized.
Thank you. And that's all very helpful. I'm ready with my
I knew we were gonna have
search.
a lot of questions, so I kind of left some time for questions.
Yeah, no, I'm ready with my search plan, Lynette. Let's see. So now we are going to begin answering any questions that folks have. We're curious to hear, any questions you all have had from housing searches you have undertaken, or housing searches that you're getting ready to take with new refugee neighbors. As a reminder, you can still submit questions through the questions pane in your attendee control panel. Let me see. So just looking, you still have a moment. Go ahead and type those questions in. Let's see. So Lynette, one question is regarding the occupancy requirements. If folks want to find out the occupancy requirements in there, I believe you said it was by state, would you suggest they Google it or reach out to their local housing authority, or do you have any advice there?
The local housing authority would have those, and then also you can go to the city website ordinance, and they'll have what occupancy limits are in that actual area, because sometimes they vary even from city to county.
Gotcha. And those occupancy requirements, that would be how many people can be in a room, and then maybe the ages or what have you, or?
It's probably people per room to make sure it's safe.
Gotcha. Let's see. Another question. How would you handle working with tax credit properties in terms of requirements and refugee documentation? I don't know if you have any ideas there.
Okay.
It might vary.
No, not very, but the same thing you would, the same documentation that most landlord and property managers are going to request is what they're going to request as well. They're going to make sure that they qualify income wise. The one thing with a tax credit property, you have to make sure that if there's a student in the household, there's more people in the household. It just can't be a student alone. That's a whole big question with tax credits, but I can give you some information because that's a whole training in itself, because tax credits can be very tricky, but they look for the same things because again, they want to make sure they put someone in that unit and it's affordable. With tax credits, because depending on the property, certain properties have a different rule saying, okay, you can only have somebody 30% AMI in this unit and somebody with 50% AMI, but that varies with each property. So that's why I say it can be a little bit tricky, but the goal is to make sure that they put someone who's a low income family.
And let's see, Lynette, could you tell me for the tax credit properties, would that be a resource that your local housing authority would be able to tell you about also, or are you kind of on your own to
You're
search
kind
out
of on your own, but those two search engines, they have tax credit properties, and I gave the search engine in the link to search for tax credit properties in your area. I provided that link.
Great, thank you. Let's see. Someone was asking about the issue of like new arrivals and the challenge of doing housing searches for new arrivals with no credit score, etc.
Well, again, there's some documentation that is comparable that they will have that will meet the application criteria. You just have to educate the property manager and the landlord. For example, when they're screening, they want you to have your employment history or your rental history. They want to see that you have the ability to pay and you're a stable tenant. So if you have a letter of support from the resettlement agency outlining what type of support, financial support, and wraparound services they are going to receive, that should meet their criteria when it comes to ability to pay and also their rental history. That is one thing in the I-94. I-94 should cover the background check, and if not, still is educating the property manager and the landlord. These are the most vetted individuals, so that would meet your background check criteria. But I think most of these new, like with the newcomers and refugees, a lot of property managers just are not educated on what documentation they can actually receive to meet their screening criteria. You just have to educate them on it. And that could be part of that landlord property management recruitment packet. You put that information in there.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. And then one comment was to thank you for the great ideas, and then worrying about having enough time to utilize some of these steps between knowing between arrival time and then when the client comes. And I guess one comment I might make as far as that goes is like in your checklist, like if you were doing this housing search for a new family that was arriving, like maybe you would start with the market rate, homes or what have you, because that might be the fastest, excuse me, like kind of some of those, the search engines that you had suggested or what have you, as far as like finding the market rate apartments. Would you suggest that might be one of the fastest, options?
It depends on the area. I've seen clients, if they're in more rural areas, they can get housed with public housing within a month or so.
Mm-hmm.
Again, like with larger cities, of course, you're going to have higher wait lists. It depends on the city where the person is located. I've seen, like I said, I've seen clients get in housed quicker with project-based properties versus a market rate. And then you have to be careful too with market rate. You got to make sure it's comparable and it's affordable. We also do a affordability analysis to make sure the rent that they're at, the market rate rent they're asking for, is reasonable, because now they figure all this money is out there, so they're jacking up the rent. So just FYI with market rates, you have to, and then you have to be careful because you can get, it's called market rate for a reason. You could be quoted a price one day, and if the market changes, the rent could be something totally different.
Yeah. I know most of the communities I've lived in, there have been long wait lists for some of these different options. But I know that especially public housing and some housing folks have told me that like it's one option with those resources would be at least during the your sponsorship period or the time that you're working with a client, that you could at least, if you're in one of those communities with long wait lists, not right away because it might be overwhelming, but at some point in time, introduce them to the housing authority or some of these resources and explain to them that like, oh, down the road, I have known some families who have ended up in some really great, like larger families, affordable, like housing and some great programs for them. But yeah, it was because somebody exposed them to these resources and they knew like, oh, even if I can't do this now, maybe this is something that I could do, down the road. Let's see. One of the participants is asking for your advice here, Lynette. If you have, they asked for the top three, but
Okay.
suggestions on convincing private rental communities that they should rent to refugee families when they're afraid of the risk. So yeah, so do you have any top suggestions on how to convince a hesitant private rental community when they're afraid of the risk of renting to a newcomer?
One of the things I said, get that recruitment packet together, and with that packet, you explain why you should rent to a refugee. Um, what I've done in some of our pack, what we tell some of the packets, put a success story. If you have a property manager that's already working with a client and has been very successful, you can bring on other property managers to give that support to them and say, we were hesitant at first, but this is what our experience have been. So you need testimonies from other property managers if you have some, especially if you want to convince them to come on board as a partner. Also, I would have a client, of course, you would need their consent. If you have a client that's doing well and because someone took a chance, I'll use them as a testimony as well. Have a packet giving the information, this is how their lives have been affected. They've been housed, and this is their success story. And then also the support they receive from your agency. You got to sell your agency. You got to sell what you're doing and the support you're giving them. And that should help with them being hesitant. But also, again, manpower is different from each agency. I say have a contact liaison to deal just with property managers and landlords to say, look, if you take on this client, you'll actually have someone you can call. And if you have any issues or concerns, you'll have that support too. You have to take that property, tell them, I'm going to treat you like you're my client as well, and give them that support. So that gives them a lot of comfort. And I have noticed just even talking to property managers and landlords, some of them are just not educated on the process. They're just not, they just feel that okay, once they lease up, they're just going to be abandoned and they're not going to have support and they're going to have to be that case manager for that tenant. That's the biggest fear they have.
Hmm. Thank you. And there are resources on your all's, like website also that, like
Yes.
volunteers and sponsors could take a look at and see if there might be something, that they could pull from there that they could share with a landlord
And
as
we're still
well.
in our infancy stage. We're still building a landlord property management toolkit that should be rolling out by August 15th. Please don't, I think, yeah, 15th. So we're still building materials and curriculums and, fact sheets so you can have to build up your packet to recruit a landlord. I just finished a quick fact sheet of how to do a recruitment. So that should be on our website pretty soon. So you can use that to develop your recruitment and how to keep them engaged. So there's some resources we're still building up on.
Great. Let's see. And then there's another question in here about, if you have any thoughts on when the client maybe still doesn't have a social security number, and how to address that situation. I know that some, like you said, kind of with education, some landlords
The
have rented to
I-94.
refugees
Mhm.
before and no. But I'm sorry, what were you saying?
The I-94 card.
Hmm. Great. Um, Yeah, and we're going to be sharing all of the links and the Refugee Housing Solution website as well. So that shouldn't be a problem. Let me see. Just seeing if there are any other examples here
Yes,
or any
ma'am.
other questions. But I think that we may have taken care of everyone's questions. And I know that housing searches are tough these days, even when you're not moving globally or what have you. It's tough, locally. So I think it is just a matter of kind of like looking at all of these resources that you shared, Lynette, and reaching out to networks and kind of starting that housing search, and also being flexible and not getting discouraged. But let me see. So I do want to thank you, Lynette, for coming
Thank you
and
for
sharing
having me.
all of these resources. And I want to thank everyone out there for attending today's RWC Lunch and Learn. Like I said, you will be receiving an email with a link to today's webinar, as well as the presentation with the links. And on behalf of Refugee Welcome Collective, thank you for joining us, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much. Thanks, Lynette.
Bye-bye.